getting back to this,
basic question.
Yeah, disenfranchisement in 1948. I mean, in 1948, the upcountry Tamils that they are referring to are people who were brought from India, right?
By who?
By the British.
Why were they brought over?
To work in the estates.
But
Because the Sinhalese refused to work.
Oh, I see.
In the tea estates and the rubber estates. So people were brought from India to work in those estates.
Okay.
So those are the people who were disenfranchised at the point of independence.
So at the point of independence,
so there's the distinction.
Was there a demographic imbalance in the sense that were the Sinhalese minority before independence, or were they always majority?
They were always majority.
So when the Brits took over,
yeah,
it was a colonization of a majority of Sinhalese people. Is that right?
I mean, they colonized the entire country.
Yeah, but majority of the
yeah, the Sinhalese. Yeah,
okay.
Sinhalese.
Now
when the Sinhalese in the central areas refused to work in the estates, they brought Indian Tamils.
So are the Sinhalese taking revenge for this for the Tamil who were siding the Brits?
There is no question of revenge. I mean, I agree that in 1956, with the
announcement of Sinhalese being the only language.
Precisely. That brought about tension. That was the start of the problem.
It's irony, isn't it? Bangladesh had the
ideally, President Rajapaksa, in my view, in 2009, got a fabulous opportunity, right? Like what Gandhi predicted in South Africa. If Rajapaksa was able to legislate that all people who lived in Sri Lanka at 2009 and who wanted to come back would be classified as Sri Lankans, as opposed to Tamil, Sinhala, Muslim, upcountry, low country, you see, then we could have had a foundation to build upon.
Okay, can I ask you a question? And this is going to be a brutal question to you. How many prime ministers, how many ministers, MPs and presidents have been killed by the Tamil Tigers throughout that 26 years?
One president. And they almost killed another president, that's Chandrika Kumaratunga. Then they eliminated all the moderate Tamil leaders. And they also...
How many all? 10, 5, 6?
Or 10,
10 okay.
At least 10. And on the Sri Lankan side, on the Sinhalese
so
side...
are you saying Tamil Tigers were an extremist group?
Obviously.
Okay, so they did not like moderates.
Moderates, yeah.
And then what was on the Sinhalese side, what happened?
You mean...
Did the Tamils attack Sinhalese and kill them as well?
They did.
So senior members of the parliament?
Senior parliamentary members were assassinated.
Okay. And this was part of Tamil Tigers' fight for independence?
Yep, you can say so.
Independence of Sri Lanka into two different segments, one for Tamil and one for Sinhalese.
All the decent, moderate politicians on both sides were eliminated by the Tamils. That is the problem that we have today. That is the problem that we have today.
Gentlemen, you may not be supporting Tamil Tigers as an organization. I'm not sure if you do. I'm not asking that question. I'm asking a simple question. It's a small island. I've been there myself. And I've traveled quite extensively. The country is nice. How can you divide an island so small into two nations? It's one nation, it's one island. How could Tamil Tigers even envisage such a dream to be successful? When they, in population-wise, form less than 15% of the total population. Yes, sir.
How can I actually take East Pakistan out of India?
We're not talking about East Pakistan today.
Exactly. Can I weigh in on that? I mean, historically speaking, the Tamils have had their own system of governance until the colonial powers decided that these two separate nations are going to be administratively joined together, and then that becomes as a part of the colonial surgical process of giving independence to these countries where they recognize it as a state. Now you asked a very interesting question, you made a very interesting point as to if the majority is Sinhalese, they form the governments. Now what's the problem with that? Now when in deeply divided societies, and this is a matter of category that you find in a lot of societies. This is true for Belgium, this is in fact true for Scotland in its relationship with the United Kingdom, Quebec with Canada, so on and so forth.
You can't tell me in the last 100 years, Brits have gone and slaughtered, or Scots have carried out suicide bombing up and down the country, killing its prime minister? No.
No,
Scots don't do that.
let's not forget Northern Ireland there. But
Northern
anyway,
Ireland is a very different discussion.
I mean, let's not look at examples. Why did the Tamils take up arms? Why did the Tamils take up arms is the question that we need to ask for.
If you give me an example of Northern Ireland has become a colony of Britain. Majority of the Irish people want that back to become part of their country. Now, those people who are in Northern Ireland, they may want to remain with Britain. That colonial history and its legacy still lives on, I understand that. But give it 10, 15 years time, 25 years time, it's very likely that Northern Ireland would have a cessation and would end up in the mainland island. That's a clear history.
But
Sri Lanka is something very different. It's a small island, within which, internally...
Belgium is small, so
talk about Sri Lanka.
Let me talk about Sri Lanka. Yes, I mean, it's important to recognize that the Tamils consider themselves to be a nation, right? And that doesn't necessarily equate into a separate state. In fact, the Tamils have consistently pointed out throughout this last 60 years that if there is a settlement within a united state that recognizes the Tamil nation's own sort of distinct contribution within that state, something like the arrangement that you have, but not within a unitary state, and I make the difference between a united and a unitary state. We've said that if Tamil self-determination and nationhood within a united state can be recognized, we are very well willing to recognize a solution within the united state. That's exactly why the LTTE took up arms.
How did LTTE's what you call methodology pay any dividend back to the Tamil?
No,
and you've ended up with much bigger losers.
No, okay. If you look at then this is an argument against all liberation movements, right? Any movement that is for a political
between a liberation movement and an extremist movement.
Liberation movement. I mean, there is a thin line. Now, what might be a liberation movement to you might be an extremist or a terrorist organization to me. So this is a political. This is how you look at it politically. Now, if you ask me the question, let me concede something. No. What I'm saying is that LTT was part of a whole number of militant groups that popped up, particularly after 1983. I mean, the LTTE started off, and a number of militant movements started off in the mid-1970s after the Constitution of 1973, which absolutely excluded the moderate Tamil leadership. But the point that I'm making is it wasn't just the LTTE, it was a whole number of militant groups. It was a liberation movement, a spontaneous call on the part of Tamil youth to take up arms, because that is the way that you are going to defend your family and your nation. But let me concede this about the LTTE, that as part of the liberation struggle, there were excesses. Okay. Will you tell me that there were certain mistakes and grave errors that were made as part of the conduct of the liberation movement? I would say yes. And would you say that whatever the LTT stands accused of in terms of war crimes needs to be investigated? We say yes, let there be international independent investigation as a whole. But what we are saying is that there is a political background in terms of what the LTT's armed struggle was about. And that armed struggle is about justice for the Tamil nation. That the Tamil nation has to be recognized either within the Sri Lankan state as a community that can self-rule. We use the words of self-government, self-determination, and self-determination doesn't have to be necessarily a separate state. But when that self-determination is not recognized within a state, and when we've been persecuted and killed persistently, and when it becomes a matter of security, a life and death question for the Tamil people, and if that life and death question for the Tamil people can only be recognized in a separate state, we might also have to think about it. Are we going to say, just because we are going to keep the country united, that we can't have a separate state if that's the only way that you are going to provide security for the Tamil people? Let's remember that the armed violence of the Tamil youth was a response to state terrorism. Take, for example, the 1983 riots. I'm sure Mr. Upali Jayathilaga won't say no to this. There were more than 3,000 Tamils who were massacred in Colombo. You see, there were lists. I mean, people have academically commented about this enough. The International Commission of Jurists at that point pointed out that 1983 was possibly a genocide. At that time, it was a genocidal massacre. What happened? The government provided lists. Voters list. Again, this is something hopefully that Mr. Jayathilaga won't deny. Voters list. Giving the attackers and looters of Tamil businesses and establishment and Tamil residences as to how to identify. So I'm saying, yes, I mean, let's look at this in a much more complex way. This is a complex problem. But let's also recognize that the Tamils taking up arms and there being an armed struggle was part of a whole narration in terms of the post-independence Sri Lankan state. leaving really no space for the Tamils
Pause
in
with
terms
that.
of an existential problem.
Pause with that. So, Upali, here is a very powerful and a very compelling point that Guru Paran makes, which is Tamils were left with no option. They were strangled, they were suffocated almost, they had no room to maneuver except react to the Sinhalese-led government's terrorist activities, state-led. What do you say to that?
I don't think so. I mean, in Sri Lanka, we have had similar problems, both from the Tamil community and the Sinhala community. A brutal war was fought by the government against the Sinhalese community in two periods. In 1971, there was insurrection. In the 1980s, there was insurrection. There is no cry for an international investigation with regard to the Sinhalese youth that were eliminated. You see, because the state had no choice.
But how can you justify a state taking a brutal role in having no choice but to eliminate its citizens?
Yeah,
that sounds like Hitler.
Not Hitler. I mean, the type of killings that the LTT and the JVP did, right? The government had no choice. The government had no choice.
To pause with that, government had no choice but to behave like Hitler, brutalizing and killing its own people. Well, perhaps that's not the right conclusion, but whatever the conclusion is, we'll continue after the break. Don't go too far away. Salam alaikum.
Could help get a loan approved for you.
Welcome back. We're talking about Sri Lanka with their war crime. I have a very fond memory of Sri Lanka. My wife and I would travel. It was part of our honeymoon traveling across the globe. We went to Sri Lanka. And we had a fantastic time. It was a very nice place, nice people, quite a pleasant culture. It wasn't so intense like you see in India or Bangladesh. It wasn't on your face type of a culture. It had the flavor of a developing country with prosperity and education embedded in the culture of people. And yet we see the behavior within the political realm no different to some of the less developed and less literate countries in the neighboring area. And it is saddening, isn't it? It's very sad. We're still asking, is it justifiable for a state to behave like Hitler in order to quell the so-called uprising in one hand, and on the other hand, perhaps for peace and prosperity of the country, that's the only step it thought viable? Well, evidence says that there has been no trouble since, apparently. The country is very prosperous, it's doing very well. Investments pouring in, China is there, India is there, Britain is there, any other developed nation's interest is opened up because of the current government. What else would you want? I don't understand why Tamils are complaining.
Except for the Tamils, actually.
What's wrong with the Tamils? Are they not prospering
Right.
from the development?
I appear for 192 claimants in the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka, and they are only part of 7,500 other claimants who are before the Supreme Court. And this is just an example where the Ministry of Defence, the Sri Lankan Army, has taken over private lands belonging to Tamil people.
And your land is
this is in Jaffna. Well, not particularly my land. I live in Jaffna town, but I'm talking about more north towards Jaffna, where 6,381 acres of land is being taken over in the name of national security from the Tamil people. And this is not just in Jaffna, but also in Mannar.
And they're not being compensated for it.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, it's not even the
Which is a crime, international crime, as well as I'm pretty certain domestic crime.
So that's one example. So land grabs, as we call it, is happening intensely.
I thought it was happening
post-war.
only in Zimbabwe under Mugabe.
But here you go, Sri Lanka, add Sri Lanka to that list, right? So you have, and there is an ethnic dimension to this, dimension to it. I mean, then there is the issue of civilization.
I can understand it though.
And this is post-war.
Look,
This is
look, there has been a huge price that Sri Lankan communities have paid. 26 years of a brutal war. If they don't have security presence up north within the Tamil people, where would they have it?
Well, the reason that what we have to look at it is this land is not grabbed just for the national interest, as they say, because what the military is doing is now they're cultivating in this land, and they're cultivating and they're bringing out producers to the market and driving poor Tamil farmers away from the livelihood. So if you really look at it, there is a genocidal intent to drive the whole farming community away, because it is not just, as they say, it's under the pretext of national security, but then how come the army and the military is actually doing cultivation? This is just one example. The same with the fisheries, the same with other sectors. So the prosperity what you see outside is not the true reality what you see in the north.
Okay, I want to get to you, Upadi.
Just
Hold on. Who is responsible? I mean, what is the interest here? Is China playing a huge role? And this is a question we're all asking. China has developed two harbors. It's got every interest in developing the Sri Lankan infrastructure for its natural resources, at least not from Sri Lanka, but from other parts of the world, and it would find this route quite prosperous. India could be very jealous of the fact that other parts of Sri Lanka is being developed, where the small strait that it is between its own land and Sri Lanka is now being completely left and let it almost led to be rot away. I can understand where the geopolitics could be. Do you think China is bankrolling Mr. President of Sri Lanka to carry out his genocidal policies?
I don't think there are any genocidal policies, but whatever it is, these interests of nations in Sri Lanka has gone on for years. In the 1980s, the US was interested in the Trincomalee Harbour. So it is not something that has come about recently.
No, but China has developed.
China has developed here.
So
China has an interest, obviously.
What's the interest?
The harbour.
But we know China.
Yeah.
It doesn't come without strings.
Any country doesn't come with
Yeah, I know, but Chinese strings,
Yeah.
unfortunately, are quite strong.
Yeah.
Much stronger than Indian strings.
So, I mean, Sri Lanka has had no choice.
Would you?
But
It's a sovereign country.
Yeah, it's a sovereign country, but
You could say to China, get lost, go to hell.
no, I mean, after the war, it needed resources to develop the
But
infrastructure.
look at the picture that you're painting
Yeah.
about China, about Sri Lanka. China has a checkered history of
Yeah.
violation of human rights.
Yeah.
We don't have to go very far.
Yeah.
Tiananmen Square is a very living example, and it will live in our memories for years. Hold on. The whole of southern people within China are being brutalized. Chinese people are being brutalized by this communist state, the one-party system it runs the country. Now, this China is now exporting its own philosophy onto Sri Lanka. It's found an ideal partner in Rajapaksa, the president, thinking, yo, you know what, this guy's going to do our bidding. This sounds brilliant to me.
That is an interpretation that can be given, but as far as I'm concerned, all countries at some stage have had these types of problems. For example, when you take Britain, its involvement in Iraq, the British state denied any atrocities committed by our soldiers here, but the courts here upheld, right, the applications brought before court on human rights violations.